Whatever you're funny, Peacock's got it exclusively. Bears beats The Office on Peacock. Stream every moment from Dunder Mifflin and explore bonus extras and exclusives. Plus, if you're looking for more classic hits, you can stream every episode of Parks and Recreation, 2.5 Men, and every season of SNL. In the mood for something brand new? Check out Peacock's original comedies, The Amber Ruffin Show, and Saved by the Bell. Whether you're craving a new binge or familiar fave, you can find tons of comedy hits on Peacock. Get started for free at peacocktv.com.
You're about to enter into a new world of knowledge, curiosities, and high strangeness. This is a podcast of Straight Up Strange Productions. This episode is brought to you by our Patreon supporters. Become a patron today at patreon.com/intotheportal.
Hello, I'm Amber A.
And I'm Andrew McKay.
And welcome back into the portal, your gateway to the bizarre. How are we doing today, Andrew?
Oh, yes, indeed. Yes, gateway to the bizarre, indeed. It's, welcome back, everybody, to a Saturday edition of Film Friday this week.
Cinema Saturday.
Cinema Saturday, that's right. Hey, I totally forgot about that term. Yeah. It is you know what though? I'm going to go ahead and say it now. This is a classic. It's a classic Film Friday because we're definitely keeping the spooky vibes rolling as we usually do with these movies, but definitely a film associated with Halloween. But it's one that we had actually never, ever seen before, which is kind of crazy. So I think horror movie buffs out there might be banging their heads against the wall at us a little bit with this.
Yeah.
So what are we getting into today, Amber?
Well, we are tackling the original HellRaiser movie from 1987. This was actually, interestingly, the directorial debut for Clive Barker, which is kind of a household name as far as directors go, even though he is kind of on the fringes as far as like mainstream cinema at least.
The horror movie community will definitely, obviously knows, but
yeah. And our listeners, if they've listened to all of our Film Fridays, will know him from Nightbreed, which we covered quite a while ago now.
Yeah.
I think it was like last Halloween, maybe even.
Around that time.
Mm-hmm. That was a fun one, though. I really enjoyed it. Mm-hmm. And he's also known for the Candyman series. So he's dipped his toes in the horror genre more than a few times. And this series in particular, it's described mostly as generically as a British supernatural horror flick. But it's dealing with all sorts of really interesting things, and it makes for an incredible series, and he's kind of fleshed that out over 10 films.
Ooh, fleshed that out, eh?
Like my little... But anyways, this is interesting because we're dealing with all sorts of things like interdimensional worlds, demons like springing up from the underworld, some inter-familial drama as well, and some sexual tensions.
Oh, indeed. Yes.
It makes for a great experience, in my opinion, I would say. Hey, would I dare to venture on your behalf?
Oh, God, I like this movie a lot. I mean, we were pretty blown away that there's a lot more than just a handful of these films. There's like 10, I believe. There's about 10. And on top of that, too, there's a series of books. There is also comics on it, and there's a extensive merchandise behind it as well. And the most recent was actually just a couple of years ago, 2018, there was HellRaiser Judgment released. Oh, sick. Okay, well, we'll have to go back and watch that. See, that's the thing. It's like, you say merchandise. I've known of this main character that we'll get into, the Pinhead character in this film. We've known of this since we were little kids. Like, I've seen that in costume shops. It was all on the rack there with the Freddys and the Jasons and the Michael Myers of the film world. But I never ventured into that. Just for whatever, because it is so different. It's so different than all these other Halloween-y, spooky movies.
It's kind of dark. It's even darker. I don't even know. Would I say that? Like, I mean, I don't know. Yeah. For us, it was. And even just perhaps it was the imagery alone. And the subject matter is pretty intense, too, if you think about it. There's a lot going on there that's pretty mature. But even more so than, say, like a Friday the 13th, where it is kind of like...
Just stab. Like,
you're kind of just laughing the whole time, you know what I mean? It's just silly teenagers, as opposed to like, you know, this guy with his second wife that's already failing and all this drama, and he's just a cuckold and all this stuff. But you're right, though. He is one of the most recognizable horror figures, and I was terrified of this movie when I was young. Because we lived in the days of going to the movie store, and you'd see all the covers on the shelves, and you know, I really did like to go down the scary movie section, and I would see this guy, and he really freaked me out. So kind of lived in my nightmares to a certain degree.
Totally. And same for me too, without ever having seen it. You know why I think that is?
Why?
Because we actually see the eyes, the face. It's not just the goalie mask or the Michael Myers mask or whatever, and these massive figures. It's like, for whatever reason, that pale white skin and the makeup and everything with that figure. It's raw.
It's out there. It's like, and just all the nails alone. It's like, what happened to this guy? But anyways, it all started with, I thought this was kind of cool because Barker, he wrote a novella, and that was kind of the inspiration for this whole series. And it did kind of translate into a screenplay as well before it was made into a movie, and it was titled The Hellbound Heart.
Yes.
And according to Barker, he says, here's a quote from him, the story of HellRaiser is based on a novella, The Hellbound Heart. The movie is based upon that story, but it is quite a distance from it. There's been many changes. And then it's an original screenplay that he wrote with the intention of making it his directorial debut. Lots of revisions, I guess.
Yeah, no doubt.
And some of them were his, I would imagine, and then a lot of them were actually coming from like censorship boards. So we'll get into that with like the fun facts and stuff, because there's quite a bit cut out.
Yeah.
Another pun there a little bit.
Yeah, you're all about them so far. Oh man, I got the tally's at 2 so far, people. Keep count with me, listening.
I was kind of thankful though, like most horror movies of the genre, of this time period, I feel like in the 80s, it's kind of like simplified. And I think it's done in a beautiful way for this film. It didn't need to be overly complicated. And I think it also speaks to how it originated as a screenplay, right? And how it was supposed to be acted out on stage.
Yep. Totally.
And all that kind of thing.
Yeah, like on stage, single location, obviously being the stage, you change the sets very basically, right? But this movie essentially takes place, it's one main location, and then there's a few important things that happen outside of the house that we'll get into. But for the most part, it's the attic. It's the attic and the rest of this creepy ass house they decide to move back into. But anyway, let's get into the cast.
Well, so we have a few main characters here. We've got Julia, who is one of the sort of center revolving pieces here. She plays the wife.
She's a peach.
She is a peach, and she's the wife of Larry Cotton. Poor old Larry. He's an interesting bird, that guy, and he plays a much different character than the one we saw him in X-Files.
Oh yes, deep dive there.
Trivia. Yeah, super fun. Like, he's known for a lot more, and I can't remember off the top of my head what it is, but he did a really good job in that episode, and so he's kind of reprising another supernatural role, but on the other side of it, where he's just this like kind of pathetic cuckold, like I said, and doesn't really have much agency throughout the entire movie. I
mean, he doesn't know. He's got the personality of like a cuckold, but he's not actually in reality. Like, he doesn't. He's just. What do you mean? He is. He's not like watching. I mean, he doesn't know she's cheating on him or anything.
Oh yeah, but
he's just. He's definitely getting walked all over.
Yeah.
That's for sure.
Yeah.
Yes.
Pretty unfortunate. Like I said, he's on to the second marriage already, so not such a good situation. That whole first scene was so like awkward when they like are coming into the house, his old family house too, which is kind of interesting if you think about that. And it's just kind of saturated with their history. Yeah, like they left New York because of the hustle bustle and they weren't happy there. So we thought this would make her happy, right? Making this change. Yeah. And you're like, what? Just the classic thing in movies like this where you're like, how do you go through your day to day and you're still with this? Okay, anyway. I know, right? It's teed up perfect for a horror movie, that's for sure. She's miserable. Just awful. And then you get Kirsty, the daughter, and she's grown up and everything, so she has her own decisions to make and decides not to live with them, which is kind of funny, I thought. And she, for obvious reasons, having to do with Julia and her impossibilities to live with.
Yeah.
And also we do have the other main character here, Frank, who is kind of like, there's skinless Frank and then the regular Frank. So there's two versions, and they are played by different people.
Skinless Frank.
Skinless Frank.
I feel like that could be like a really cool title for like, I'm thinking of Bob's Burgers, like menu, right? You have like a hot dog place that's like, you got a horror movie theme one, you got the Skinless Frank, and it's HellRaiser themed.
And then you got the skin bone from X-Files.
Skinner. Oh man. Great ideas. Write this down, everyone. Let's get a horror movie hot dog franchise going. Okay.
And of course, we can't leave out the Cenobites too. So, it's described as this like interdimensional sadomasochistic order of demons. And it's like, it's pretty cool. And you've got 4 of them all together. The main one being Pinhead, who is this ringleader. And then we've got Chattering Cenobite, which is just disgusting. And they're all disgusting in their own way, but this one is just...
pretty gross.
It's not good.
Disturbing.
And I love the description of this. Well, the name Butterball. It's like, oh man, come on. And then we just have one described as the female Cenobite, which is pretty clearly she's got some feminine characteristics,
didn't realize that at first.
Including, I'll say, there's a very vaginal looking opening in her neck.
In the neck.
So
that's not supposed to be
just
there.
Just to clarify that. But yeah, so that's our cast.
You know what? And the female character at Cenobite, I actually didn't clue into that on first watch of this with a lot of the lines. And I found that character had the creepiest voice. Because like Pinhead has that deep, horrifying, like demon voice. It's like, okay, yeah, that's scary. Chatter guy's just chattering. Butterball doesn't say anything. But the woman's voice is very like this and like a serpent almost or something. It's like very spooky. Super spooky.
Yeah.
But before we even get these creatures, though, obviously there's a means to actually like summon them, right? So the film starts off in this foreign bazaar, I'm going to call it. That's kind of what it looks like to me, right? It's this sort of street shop.
It's a sex shop.
It's a sex shop in a foreign location, and Frank has gone out of his way to track down this place because essentially he's like, you use the phrase. I suck at saying it. What's the phrase? He's into pleasure and pain, right?
Yeah,
basically.
like sadomasochistic kind of tendencies.
And
perhaps.
Yes.
Or he's a sex addict.
He's a sex addict. He's always looking for the next thing. Yeah. Like, I don't think he's...
Or just an addict.
Or just an addict in general. Yeah, because like his brother, Larry, makes the comment when they first walk into the house, like, oh, he's probably in jail somewhere or something, right?
Yeah.
Like implying that he wasn't just like into weird kinky sex stuff, but it was like on the lam maybe from other things. You know what I mean?
High risk lifestyle.
High risk lifestyle indeed. And he definitely kept that vibe rolling with this little business transaction because he sits down with this gentleman and he's looking at what appears to be this really strange sort of antique puzzle box, I guess, if you will, right? That's quote unquote, rumored that when it's solved, will summon these spirits that will bring you nothing but pleasure and ecstasy that you can't experience in our worldly plane here, right? So he purchases this, and there's this really weird comment that this guy makes right at the beginning. He's like, take it. I don't know if I have this exactly right, but he hands it to Frank and says, take it. It's yours. It always was. And we can come back to that later on here, but that's weird. I didn't clue into that right away. And then after the fact, I was thinking like, is this one of the Cenobites in the world here trying to lure something in? Or I don't even know. Like, is this guy involved somehow? He knows what's coming.
It's some sort of like box of destiny.
Right? Or I made the joke to you earlier. I was like, is it more like a Jumanji? And this guy's like, I just need this thing the hell out of my house. Like, oh yeah, take it, buddy. It's awesome. You're going to love it. It's yours. Yeah. Like, get it away from me as fast as possible, right? But he takes it back, brings it up to the attic. And I believe it's the attic that we end up in, right? Because that's where he disappears. So that's where he gets resummoned back from. And I'm like, how hard is this thing to solve? That's my first question. Like, how long is he sitting in that attic? It didn't seem like it was that hard to solve. He's kind of messing around with it a little bit. The lights start to kind of shine in through the walls, which I thought was really cool because obviously you're in this one room in the house, but it's isolated. So that all of a sudden, all the surrounding 360 degrees of this room is now being permeated by this other dimension. So there's just this light coming from everywhere. Like the rest of that house is now ceased to be for Frank. Which I thought was kind of cool.
He's like crossing through the threshold.
And he's like all stoked.
Yeah.
But then I think the beginning might even be one of my favorite parts of the entire movie, with the hooks just start flying out. Mm-hmm. And he realizes the look on his face is so epic, right? It's like the classic, like, wow, I made a mistake.
Oh, yeah.
I don't want to get too dark here, but I don't know if like this, you know what it reminded me of? This is going to sound kind of weird, but it reminded me of that face reminded me of the story from Tiger King, with the guy giving the story after the fact about the young guy shot himself and realized, like, wow, I made a mistake, like in that exact moment, like the look on his face.
Yeah.
Yeah,
you messed up.
And so that's a pretty odd way to kick things off here, because then we just end up with Larry and Julia in the midst of moving into Larry's old family home. And we, like you said, there's clearly this massive disconnect between the two of them. There's the daughter, Christy, who's clearly not a big fan of Julia whatsoever, because we learn that it's Larry's second wife, like very, very quickly, right? And that's like, man, you settled hard on the second wife here. You must have been a lonely guy. But the plot thickens from there.
Well, it does, yeah. And it's quickly explained why Julia is so distant. It's weird. It's like, okay, so you have like Larry, and he's totally out to lunch, and he's, unpacking and helping the movers and whatever else. And you get Julia doing her first sort of like move of secrecy, where she goes back up to the top, to the attic, and she like kind of roots around in Frank's little like decrepit nest thing that he has. And it's a classic scene of like, it depicts the classic interpretation or stereotype of what a drug addict lives in, right? It's just like this little nest on the floor, this bare floorboards and nothing on the walls. And it's just not good at all. And she ends up seeing some really strange things. And I honestly didn't know. This was a turn for me because I didn't really see this coming, but she finds these photographs and among all of his possessions, and it's a bunch of like, him doing some pretty lewd activities with some other people, multiple people in some of them. And she doesn't really have the reaction that I thought she would have. She kind of just looks at it as if like, like, oh yeah. And then she takes one of them, and it's a picture of him. And it's the only one where he's like not like sexually compromised or like naked or anything like that.
Yeah.
And then she rips, because it's clear that he had another partner as well. And she rips her out of the photo and then takes that as a souvenir. And I'm like, hey, what is going on here? Because like we get this whole thing with the husband Larry saying all this stuff about, he's in jail and blah, blah, blah. And we have no idea Julia's background or involvement in all of this.
Yeah.
So we quickly realize that she is romantically involved with Frank and has been even since before they were married. And it's just a very, very weird scene, I'll say, that where he like quote unquote seduces her. And
yeah, it's definitely strange.
It's not only cringe in the sense that it's awkward, but it's also cringe in the sense that like you really see another side of Julia that's like, obviously not very favorable and paints her in a pretty negative light, I would say. And that kind of continues as a trend. We see her character pretty quickly, right?
Oh God, yeah. I mean, I didn't like her before any of that stuff happened. When she first walks in, like you don't like her from Jump Street. She's just this.
She's there to play a function.
Yeah. And you can tell she's not just stuffy about the house, like being old and like not liking it. And like the very first introduction to her, like you can tell she's just reserved because she's hiding something from him.
Yes. And how he's so just like out to lunch and just like not even willing to acknowledge it, I would say to a certain degree. He's in a certain state of denial, right? Because
you
can't really think you're in a good relationship.
He's delusional. He's repressing it. He's trying to put on the show for his daughter. He's trying to make a go of it in this new place and thinks that this is going to solve all his problems. And you should have stayed in New York, pal.
When this house is going to become the center of his problems. And I think honestly, the disconnect between the two of them, the Julia and Larry, is kind of what this film is relying on for some sort of element of plausibility to convince the audience that any of this is even remotely plausible.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't even, like, the way that this movie plays out is very odd, as if, like, he doesn't have access to certain parts of the house or just chooses not to go to them, even though they're very closely positioned. It's a very tight-knit upper stairs area.
Yeah.
So there's not a lot of room to hide secrets. So it's very interesting the way that plays out. And I think
Bizarre.
again, like now that I'm thinking about this, it kind of lends itself to its origins as a play. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, totally.
Like a little bit of that suspension of disbelief.
I think, and that's its success as an actual film adaptation of that. I like that. It's like this, like, because we joked about it. We're like, how in the hell did they not notice Frank, this rotting corpse, turning into a slightly less version of that over days, and murders happening? There's no police investigations. There's no follow-up. There's no stench. There's no smell. There's no questions asked whatsoever.
No.
And it's like, but that to me is almost like adds to the creepiness. It's almost like there was maybe some sort of an element to Frank. Obviously, there's a supernatural element to what's going on with Frank.
Well, yeah.
And maybe a part of that is like, I don't know, because like Julia's tiptoeing around trying to keep this from everyone, but like everyone is so oblivious. It's almost like it's too good to be true. It's almost like it's too easy that she's being able to do it this way.
Yeah,
you know
it is
mean?
kind of strange. And if I'm not mistaken, there was that one scene where they had like a dinner party or something, and she was just being
so weird.
Oh, so strange. Weird. All right, let's get into what's going on with this box, because that's definitely one of the centerpieces of this film, and it's quite fascinating. But first, let's have a quick word from our sponsor. Do you feel there's something interfering with your happiness or preventing you from achieving your goals? Sometimes we need to ask for help. And these days, it's easier than ever to get started on the right track to mental well-being and happiness with BetterHelp.com. BetterHelp.com is an online counseling service that's there for you when you need it. You can connect with your specially matched professional counselor in a safe and private online environment within 24 hours of signing up. It's so convenient to get professional help from a licensed counselor. You can now get help on your own time and at your own pace. You can schedule secure video or phone sessions, plus you can chat and text with your therapist. This is not self-help or a crisis line. It's a professional service. And if you are not happy with your counselor for any reason, you can request a new one at any time for no additional charge. BetterHelp.com is available worldwide with 3,000 U.S. licensed therapists across all 50 states, with 4 communication modes available, including text, chat, phone, and video. Financial aid is available for those who qualify. Guys, this is secure, convenient, professional, and better yet, it's truly affordable. Into the Portal listeners get 10% off your first month with discount code PORTAL, PORTAL. So why not get started today? Go to betterhelp.com/portal and simply fill out a questionnaire to help them assess your needs and get you matched with your own counselor. Again, that's BetterHelp, HELP.com/portal to get 10% off your first month. And we're back. All right, so what's up with this box thing anyway?
Great segue.
Right?
Perfect. It is weird.
It is strange. And the fact that it's just kind of lurking in this like back alley sex shop or house of pleasures or whatever you want to call it, I don't really understand. It's so intricate, though. It reminds me of the Antikythera mechanism.
Ooh, like, something like that, yeah.
It's very alluring, and maybe like, even the fact that it's gold is kind of like drawing the human towards it.
I'm just going to go ahead and say that, like, if it's purchased from something that is, you're going into a sex shop, you definitely need some instructions to come with that thing, because otherwise, that could get uncomfortable real fast. It is a cube after all.
Yes. Anyways. But what was the purpose of this puzzle then? Is it to, like the man sort of alluded to, release these or summon these pleasure gods? It just seems kind of vague. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you got to be either he's not buying it at all, and he's just kind of like, oh, this is cool. Like, let's try this out. I don't really know what's going to happen. It's going to release pleasures of some kind, and then he ends up summoning the Cenobites, which are these things we were talking about a second ago with Pinhead and Butterball, and Deep Throat, I guess, is the name of the female character, which is
one of the names for her.
One of the names of her.
Mm-hmm.
But I wanted to look more into this because it's like I wanted to go deeper into the background because we haven't read like the novella and you know the canon of the Cenobites and the Clive Barker creation that is this world is so bizarre. But I feel like it does play off of a lot of themes and ideas of interdimensionality and definitely like hell and different iterations of whatever that might be to certain people. So like I just like straight looked up on, you know, the wiki fandom for these movies. Where did they come from? How did they become? And one of
you mean the Cenobites in particular?
The Cenobites in particular.
Oh, okay. All right.
Did you want to get into that a little bit?
Sure. I had a few comments just on the box itself.
Oh, okay, sure.
Before we get into the Cenobites.
Let's do that.
Because I think it's interesting just to even pause for a second, just to say, like, you know, like it's described as this Chinese puzzle box.
Right.
All right. This movie, obviously this was written in the 70s or 80s or whatever, in that kind of time period. I'm just thinking like, it's kind of this convenient Orientalist type sort of paradigm where it's like the other, it kind of like, it's this magic that comes from another realm.
Sure.
Like, you know, like philosophically, and like you're saying, right? Like this connotation of hell and even of pleasure in itself, because we get into some weird things with these Cenobites and their versions of pain and pleasure and how those interweave.
Yeah.
But I thought it was kind of like, did you have any comments on like just the fact that this is described as like a Chinese puzzle box? You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't really seem to have anything Chinese about it.
No, I mean, I you know, it's funny, like on a couple other random blogs and just because there's a bajillion things written about this movie, some sources more reputable than others, and some said tossed out like it was a shop in Morocco I saw in one thing.
Oh, yeah.
You know,
well, it was clearly like an Asian man.
Very clearly. And I think that's totally the vibe aesthetically that they're going for, that it's, you got to make it look as foreign as possible. This guy has gone to the ends of the earth, Frank, to find this most crazy remote back alley shop where you can get stuff that you can't get anywhere else.
Oh, you know what it's like? It's like the Gremlins.
Yep, exactly like that. Exactly like that. This is the shop you go to get this box. You get dragon's tears there. You can buy homunculi there, right? You can get all kinds of stuff like that probably.
And so if you think about it, it's like, okay, culturally speaking, like this idea that this came from this far distant land or whatever, and the fact that it's summoning these things, like, you know what I mean? Like how does that really play into the epistemology of like, you know, like the other and the self? Like, you know, you can kind of dive down that rabbit hole a little bit, I guess, but do you have any?
Well, the vibe I got was that the box, like, here's the thing. We don't know the origins of the box. Like, he's going there to get it, but that doesn't mean that's where it's from. That's where he's picking it up from.
Yeah.
But you just said, like, there's no markings on it. It's like an artifact of the earth. It's like an otherworldly object, obviously, right? It's not like it was made by man. It
reminds me of something that would be like hovering in like the center of the pyramid or something.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Exactly.
It's just like, it's got the code and all this like script across it and all this weird, almost like Promethean-esque type thing.
It's exactly like that.
Like
it's like it shouldn't really exist, but it does.
Yeah.
And that's just it. It's like, what material is it even made out of? You know what I mean?
Is it gold or is this something else?
It looks like it's this kind of, fancy gold cube, but it's if it's an artifact of another realm, like that's what makes it cool.
Kind of reminds me of something you'd find in Harry Potter.
Oh, yes. Definitely.
But anyways, okay, so the box itself is the portal, essentially.
Right.
Very fitting for this podcast.
Very fitting indeed. And it's the portal in which the Cenobites travel to our realm, which it's, again, I had never really heard of these things before, like in passing through other movie reviews and just whatever. And I'm like, this is so cool. It's absolutely fascinating. And again, going back to what I was saying before, I was like very curious about the origin story that Barker had for these creatures. And so they're summoned by this box. And in this one wiki fandom thing, I pulled up this thing where it's basically saying that the story is that the Cenobites were wiped out by Lucifer when the realm of hell was destroyed. And there is this quote from one of the Cenobites when Kirsty, is it Christy or Kirsty? Sorry, I'm forgetting that. Kirsty. She's in the hospital scene later, like screams, go to hell. And the female Deep Throat character, or whatever you want to call her, says like, we cannot, like we can't.
Yeah.
And I was like, my mind was reeling from that quote at that moment. I was like, what do you mean you can't, you don't want to, you're not invited, you're not a being that is capable of transitioning to that. Would you want, like, are you implying that you want to go there? Is this some kind of purgatory that you're in, or do you enjoy what you're doing? chosen career path, vocation of choice. Anybody read Middlemarch out there? This definitely wasn't on the list of one of the things you could become, a Cenobite. That's a deep, deep, deep joke right there. But essentially, what these things are extra-dimensional beings who are mutilated beyond essentially being able to recognize them as human entities, even though they very are like human in form. But like the chatter guy, not very much so, like Butterball, you know what I mean? Like,
ugh, they're grotesque.
Right? But it's almost like they don't know that. And there was this one quote from one blog I read that was, it gave me shivers up my spine, where it's like they were designed with the makeup and the costumes and their mannerisms to exude horror, and because they are grotesque, but also like this element of like grace and elegance to them, the way they move and the way they talk, and they're wearing almost uniforms, right? They look like butcher uniforms, like black, like leather.
They're kind of like space butcher uniforms.
They're like space butcher uniforms, right? Yeah.
Elegance, hey. But it also displays an intense amount of suffering just in the imagery alone, which I think is why it was so disturbing to me when I was young.
Right.
Yeah.
This is the weirdest part about the Cenobites, though. In this one wiki fandom, it talked about how they were once human, with the exception of this one particular Cenobite throughout the canon or whatever. But as far as the ones we're looking at in this, so that's weird. We could talk about that later. But before we get into more details on the Cenobites, because they're kind of my favorite, let's get into some sort of like some of the best scenes here. What was your absolute favorite moment?
There was a few. I really liked the scenes where it was like, anytime we saw like skinless Frank kind of like crawling all over the place in that upstairs area, that was so creepy. Or like when he's like looking out of like the little like slat so he can like see outside, or like smoking his smoke, and it's just like, ugh, so creepy. But probably, I don't know, I really did enjoy the very horrendous acting job that Julia does in that first kill scene.
Bad.
Where it's just like, it's so like Julia as a character, not like the actress playing Julia, but just like her acting as Julia, trying to seduce, quote unquote. And this guy is just so dumb. It's just like, oh my Lord. And it was interesting because like there was a lot of, like I said, censorship that went on in this film, and this scene did have some editing back, especially of like close-ups when the hammer was like in the victim's head and all this kind of thing. And they had to like kind of like, the gore, they had to tame it down a little bit. But I thought that was pretty funny though. It was just like, and then what do you do with these bodies? Like just the way that she had to just become his slave, like his indentured. Wouldn't your first reaction just to be like, get this thing the hell out of my house?
Right.
Why do I even want to be with this thing? Because it's just disgusting. It's not even the man, if you want to call him a man, that you like were seduced by originally. He's just like a...
But that's just it. She's so broken. She's just she's pining for that one feeling she had from way back in the day, and is, I guess, clearly willing to do anything to get that sensation back again. Yeah, but I guess, let's come back to this again, because she starts murdering dudes to help Frank regenerate. He's sucking the juices, which is absolutely bizarre.
It's so weird.
And the way he's summoned back in the first place, we haven't really touched on that, but that is so strange because it does tie into the box, what the box actually is. Frank opens up the dimension in the first scene. He's hooked. He's ripped apart. The Cenobites are looking at his like ripped apart flesh in that first scene, right? He picks up like his face or what's left of it. Yeah. And then it kind of transitions from there. So we're left to think like, okay, Frank's gone, or he's going to be in a loop of this perpetual like agony, right? Then we get the injury to Larry when they're moving the mattress up the stairs, and it's his blood that ends up bringing Frank back. He drips it on the floor when he
That's an important scene,
walks into the room there. Is it his familial blood that helps bring Frank back, or is it just any blood? Because maybe just familial blood would help boost it, and because, I don't know, like
it doesn't
help
have
rejuvenate
to be him. And Julia goes to bat for him initially. She's
true.
like,
that's true.
Not Larry. To Frank, and then in the end she's like, well,
I'm sure she would have said she would have been gung ho if it wasn't for the daughter.
Yeah,
she would have been hell yeah, because that's the only thing holding her back, essentially, right? Yeah. But that's what's strange, because Frank comes back from this dripping of blood, and he comes back with the box. He's like he's not fully formed because he only had the little bit of blood to like rejuvenate him back, but he's back. He comes back into our world, the human world, with the device. And Like, that's really weird. So it's like, was this just sitting on a shelf in the Cenobites' like torture office when they were like having a break, and he managed to swipe it and then some blood dripped through from another dimension, and it was like perfect timing, and then you could just crawl back through?
Well, it could just have to be like that is the portal itself. So in opening it back up through the blood, it kind of like, comes back through with Frank. It is kind of weird though, because you're touching on something where it seems as if the house itself has an energy and has a power, and perhaps it is because of the initial opening with the box and where it was and how that room itself seemed to almost become one with the other dimension. You know what I mean? Where it was kind of like this merging going on. So when we see the blood initially dripping through the cracks in like the floorboards and going into the inner layers and the subfloor, that's where we see this house kind of come to life. And then he almost kind of like transitions out of it. It's almost like he's like a tree that grows out of the floor.
Right, yeah.
Isn't that weird?
Yeah.
And then he ends up separating himself from that. And I liked how they did like portrayed all of the bodies and how every stage of what he takes from each victim, that's all that's gone from them too. So in the end with the final victim, or not the final victim, but Larry, when he ends up getting sacrificed, poor Larry. She's just a little too late, his daughter.
Yeah.
Oh, Kirsty. But it's just the skin of him that's gone. And that's why initially she can't tell whether it's Frank or her dad, because of the fact that it's gone. So it's just like hard to see who it is.
Horrifying. Horrible stuff.
Reminds me of that chimpanzee attack victim we were just watching.
Oh my God, Monster Quest people. Yeah, that was one we hadn't seen before.
Yeah.
Super brutal. So going back to the house, like you said, it does seem to be this portal, this crossing over point, because this is where Frank accessed that dimension where he opened the box, so to speak. We don't get anything else. Other than, like with the box, other than, we get Julie at the bar trying to pick up victims and a few other little scenes outside of the house. But the most profound, in my opinion, is when Christy figures all this out, right? She's suspicious. She follows Julia back to the house. She sees her luring one of the victims in and goes in to confront her essentially, and then realizes all of what's happening, like discovers Frank in the attic, and super creepy, right? He says it's Uncle Frank, like come to daddy, like
ew.
So
what the heck?
Creepy.
I wonder if that was an ad-lib line.
I wonder, because there's a few, and one really iconic one we'll get to, but like elements like that are what really define it from the Freddy's and Jason's and those types of like horror franchises. It's like there is this very dirty, grimy, seedy underbelly of
creep
society.
Factor.
Creep factor for sure.
Where it's a little bit, it's a little less topical. It
adds to the gore.
I understand why my mom never let me watch this movie when I was young, among many other movies.
Like just as a contrast, like The Thing, another 80s movie, crazy, like gory, but because you don't have that sort of like element to it, that context, it's more, it's the sci-fi alien vibe to it. It's not as like scary to me. You know what I mean? It's not as like, it's not as cringeworthy, right? Like it doesn't make you cringe.
It doesn't have that gross factor,
right? In
a different sense of the word. And I guess that's just Clive's style. Like he didn't really do too much of that in Nightbreed that I remember, but I feel like we've never actually sat down to watch like the whole like Candyman series. I feel like that might be a little bit like that too, but who knows? We should ask if anyone listening here, if you guys have heard of that, if you'd recommend it.
Absolutely.
Or if you wouldn't, let us know.
Or if you wouldn't, yeah, totally.
Either way.
But they go through this confrontation. So like Christy goes up to the attic, realizes that it's Frank, realizes that the box is important. I think she grabs it right from him, doesn't she? Or does it fall and she goes and gets it? And then
she somehow gets
a hold of it. She hucks it out the window to keep him from getting it. And he can't like leave the attic. Like that's the thing. You mentioned that earlier. He seemingly can't leave because she hucks it out the window and he's like, no. It's like, dude, go and get it. What are you doing?
Yeah.
If you really want it that bad. She runs out and ends up fainting. And someone helps her because she wakes up at the hospital. This is the only other part where we really get like a significant scene outside of the house because she's once again opened the portal. So she wakes up and that box is like right there, which again is like, it's
weird. It just
perfect. And it's just all falls into place so perfectly. Right. She wants to call her father, but this doctor like insists she gets back into bed. And then she gets up and starts messing around with the puzzle box. and is unable to get out of the hospital room. The door is shut, and of course she ends up summoning all three of these main, or the four, I guess. Am I miscounting? Yeah, the four Cenobite creatures, and we get some of these epic quotes, like the Pinhead, "The box, you opened it, we came." Like, awesome, super epic. You know, she's and obviously she's trying to get out of it, saying that Frank's still alive.
Right.
My God.
So she just offers him up as her own sacrifice, obviously. Who wouldn't? You know, like, I actually quite like that about her character, just because she has more agency than her father. You respect her more. You like her a hell of a lot more. You want her to survive the whole time, which is definitely lends credibility to the plot.
Yeah.
And
absolutely.
Like, what did you make of her and like how she chooses to go about her role and her decisions in that movie?
Well, they're teeing her up. I mean, we got to watch just so everyone knows, we've only started with the part 1, but yeah, ton of agency, because I think they're teeing her up for the part 2. And they needed that character to battle against the Julia, and to be, you knew Larry didn't stand a hope in hell from Jump Street, right?
No.
He didn't stand a chance.
Unfortunately.
And I'm surprised her boyfriend, if you want to call him that, actually managed to sort of like
that Steve guy.
slip through too. Because this was the other thing that happens in this scene that I thought was really interesting. She opens it up and ends up running away from like this crazy slug Cenobite creature that's like chasing her down.
Not the Chatterbox one.
It's like a totally different one. It's not one of the main 4. It's like just a straight, weird, crazy, massive slug creature. That's one of the ones that almost gets him in the end, too, because she's like trying to close the box, and her boyfriend reaches over to like grab it, and she's like, no, it wasn't Butterball. It was and that's just it. It's like there's other creatures in this realm, too. It's like, was this a totally different dimension, or is this like just, you know, Cenobites are dealing with some other stuff where they're from too. They got their pleasure and pain torture factory, but they can also mosey down the street, and there's some other guys living down there, you know what I'm saying? I don't know. The other weird thing about one of the quotes in this hospital scene is the line from the main guy, from Pinhead, that is, you know, we are demons to some, angels to others. And it's really taking this, you know, hardline stance in this first movie that, from what we've read, starts to slowly change. So we'll get into that if we do other future Film Fridays, but that it's very ambiguous. They're not outright evil. They're not outright here to torture you. It's all it's to them, they don't really know what, they do know what is what, but I guess like empathy doesn't exist. They're not, it's not about like just a demon that knows that it's like doing something dark and terrible. It's like, this is just what they do.
True. It's almost as if they just don't have the same binaries that we do.
Exactly.
Pleasure, pain, good, evil, all that kind of thing, where they're just doing them. But I thought it was very weird, this lack of differentiation between pleasure and pain, and the idea, he even says in the hospital, he's like, that would be a waste of good suffering.
Right.
And it's like a good suffering that is obviously kind of a oxymoron for us.
Right.
So it is kind of interesting how the parameters of perception are so different for them.
Totally. You know what else is interesting based on that quote? The actual term Cenobite is derived from the meaning of essentially like a member of a communal religious order, right? Yeah. This is what so that's what they do. It's like suffering is such a big part of making sacrifices in religion and things like that too. This is what they are called. They you know what I mean? Just as far as breaking down the semantics of that.
Yeah, that's pretty funny, eh?
It's kind of interesting.
It's like this weird antithesis of it, but like
right.
Yeah, no, that's weird.
And like I said, despite the presence of the word hell, like it's called HellRaiser, there is no specific iconography or reference directly linking the Cenobites to this traditional, you know, quote unquote, sort of like Abrahamic or like classic iteration of like hell and demonic nature, like The Nun in like that other horror movie we just recently watched and things like that. They're sort of more like these just bizarre, omnipotent things in this other realm. So it turns more hellish as we go, and I guess the title HellRaiser just goes to show like it's based on what we see. Like we would see that as nothing but hell.
True. Yeah, that's actually a HellRaiser. It's almost like, it's kind of funny that it is a box too, because it does remind me of like Pandora's box, if you want to go there. The idea that you're just unleashing like a world of just crazy kind of thing. It doesn't know up from down or left from right or whatever. It's just kind of is what it is, and you're kind of unleashing a tornado of it.
And Pandora's box, so perfect. That's a perfect segue, because this puzzle box its name, which we forgot to mention earlier on there, was the lament configuration.
Oh, yeah, right.
We totally forgot to mention that, but it's just, like this idea, like,
lament.
Yeah.
Like you lament opening it.
I certainly would. That's how I'm pronouncing it, because I sure as hell would, pun intended.
Lament configuration. Yeah, and that'll come into play again, because obviously there's a lot more movies in this franchise.
Yeah.
We got to get our hands on.
Indeed.
Let's get into some fun facts before we wrap this baby up here, because this is funny. Like I said, there was a lot of censorship, and the film initially was given an X rating, so there was a lot of scenes that had to be cut. So let's get into a couple here. It's interesting. Like I already mentioned the one that was the first hammer murder scene. So yeah, they had to take out this close-up shot of the hammer lodged in the victim's head. And yeah, it's kind of funny. A lot of the scenes where Julia murdered people, there was a little bit of things they had to dial back. Including this one, which again kind of lends to the racy element of this film, if you want to call it that. But the second, I think it was the second victim, Julia, she's murdering him, but the actor that was playing this dude getting murdered thought it was more natural for him to do it while being naked. He thought it would get to the point in the seduction scene where he would actually have his clothes off. So he actually did do it that way. However, that was rejected by the censorship board, so they had to do like a semi-clothed version of it.
Sure.
As well, there was this close-up of Kirsty like sticking her hand into Frank's stomach, like rummaging around, exposing his guts and stuff. I know. So that was cut as well. And there was a longer version of the final scene where Frank ends up getting ripped apart by hooks again. And including, this is kind of sad, there's a final shot where his head explodes and his brain messily splashes out. And that was unfortunately cut.
And you know what's weird? I see a lot of the horror from this movie as being less graphic than like the example I gave earlier with The Thing. I think it's a lot of like the sexual overtones and context, the religious vibes and things like that like censorship boards in the 80s would have been like acutely like in tune with. Because
the like, sexuality for sure.
Because don't you think that Thing was gorier? A little bit in some ways, you might say, like the amalgamation, like when they show up and like they go outside in the snow and there's like that mass like all together.
Yeah,
and
that's
it's like
weird.
all disgusting and crazy, creepy and weird.
So
you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I hear you. But it's funny too, actually, that you mentioned the whole like the sexual aspect, because I forgot to mention there was one other scene where the initial seduction of Julia and Frank, according to Clive Barker, he, in that scene, initially had it a lot more graphic, where there was also some spanking involved. So there's a little bit of that sadomasochistic tendencies kind of shining through again. Sure. And so he had to cut that, and then he was only allowed 2 vigorous thrusts. 2 vigorous thrusts. And the third one was apparently cut. It was too much.
The third thrust just wasn't
make it. But even that scene alone was just pretty racy, pretty like, just like kind of raw. But you know what? It was the style of the movie. And I think it does speak to one of the major themes of this movie, which has to do with infidelity and the idea of like what happens to your character when you kind of go down that road. And we see a very ugly side of a person in Julia, because of who she's become. She's the compromised woman. You don't see her smile once in this whole movie. She's
not a single time.
She's afraid. She is unhappy, and she's, you know what I mean? Like almost like pining. Yeah. Weirdly. And I think it's because she looks at herself and sees a fallen woman. Yeah. Because she obviously cheated on her husband, Larry, even before they were married. So entered into that sort of contractual relationship already on uneven terms.
And they were so
dishonest.
And they were so on the nose with that too, right? Like you made that point we were watching. It's like right on top of the wedding dress. Yeah. Like they're hooking up right on top of the wedding dress. It's like
right on top.
Couldn't even be more on the nose than that. But anyway, you added in this really interesting quote here. Did you want to read this? This was from Clive Barker himself.
Yeah. Okay, so this was interesting, and he was talking about how he wanted to kind of depict the monstrous condition, I'll say, and especially within Frank himself. So he said here, generally, this is a quote, generally in monster movies, the monsters don't talk about their condition, about being a monster. What I wanted Frank to be able to do was to have dialogue scenes, even romantic scenes that play between him and Julia. I wanted Frank to be able to stand around and talk about his ambitions and desires, because I think that is what because I think what the monsters in movies have to say for themselves is every bit as interesting as what the human beings have to say. That's why in stock and slash films, I feel half the story is missing. These creatures simply become, in a very boring way, abstractions of evil. Evil is never abstract. It is always concrete, always particular, and always vested in individuals. To deny the creatures as individuals the right to speak, to actually state their case, is perverse, because I wanted to hear the devil speak. I think that's a British attitude. I like the idea that a point of view can be made by the dark side, end quote.
Yeah, and I love that. Mm-hmm. And he is so right, because like we're watching those early versions of Friday the 13th through Halloween here. It's so much fun. No knock on them at all. They are a totally different thing.
Yeah.
There is an element missing. It is just this, I'm scared because it's the gore, it's a little bit of the jump out at you scares, but the actual meaning behind it isn't there. You can fill in the blanks a little bit Mad Lib style. What happened with Jason, or why is he whatever, or is what did Mrs. Voorhees do to him really, or whatever. I don't even know.
You never hear from him really, though.
You never hear from him.
And same within Halloween, especially Michael Myers and that whole thing. The thing with Michael is like it almost becomes comical movie after movie after movie, where this guy just keeps coming back. He's larger than life, but he isn't larger than life because there isn't anything supernatural about him, so to speak, unless, someone can argue me on that. But yeah, you're missing. And that's why when you get the Rob Zombie version of Halloween, it's like I was saying to you the other day, it's like this, it's the fan fiction masterpiece of what every fan in that original series wanted, because you get to see a human side to Michael, and you get to see the origins that you don't get. All you get is allusions and references to it in the original series.
Right.
But
the other difference too, though. That's a great comparison. The other difference too, I guess I was trying to get at there, is like the idea that the Cenobites, like the Pinhead and the Cenobites, what they do is so specific. So like that's what he says in here. You know what I mean? Like, and they verbalize that. This is what we do. Angels to some, demons to others. Yeah. And then we can fill in the blanks of like what we think that means. And that's what terrifies me. That's where the fear is. It's almost like in the dialogue of that line and like those types of lines coming from the monster. That's the equivalent to me of like, say, going back to one of our very first ever film, Friday, on The Witch, where there's all the implications, the implied horror in the darkness, in the shadows, things like that.
Yeah.
That's kind of like what the lines like that are to me, because it makes me think. I'm like, but we don't get any specifics. We don't really get specifics from them. They're just like, well, we're about to show you our pleasures. It's like what he says to Kirsty. It's like, okay, buddy, I don't know what that means, but that's horrifying. I have no idea. You know what pleasures you're getting from Jason. He's going to stab you or chop your head off or whatever.
Or sink you in the lake.
So you know what, though? On that note and all these comparisons, like this is now one of my favorite Halloween movies. And we need to continue on with the franchise.
Scary movies in general.
I'd call it. I mean, we watched it near Halloween, so I'm calling it that. Wow. And it's up there. It's every year you see that movie poster all in line with again, the hockey mask, the creepy Michael Myers mask, the Scream mask. Pinhead's up there. Yep. He's one of the underdogs. He's on the bench. He's Sixth Man of the Year.
I have another actually fun, interesting fact. So that guy that played Pinhead, he was actually the original cast member that did the play version. And when he was recast, him and another fellow, I think, were both cast together. And they were both fighting over playing Pinhead because neither of them wanted to do it, simply because of the amount of makeup effort that one. It was like 6 hours worth of makeup. Yeah. And well, on top of that, they were actually a little bit vain, I would say, maybe. But they just like, it was their first on-screen role. And they were like kind of bummed out that they didn't actually have their faces showing, so to speak. So they were kind of like, oh, do I even really want to take this? But I'm probably thinking now they're happy they did.
Yeah, I'd say. And your face is showing.
It's like
it's not a mask.
It's like Ralph Fiennes being mad about playing Voldemort because it's all like, you know, like these days it's even more messed up, right? Because you have like special effects and all this sort of stuff that's beyond makeup.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's a whole nother nugget.
We've now mentioned Halloween, Friday the 13th, Harry Potter. I'm sure the witch. I'm sure there's a few others throughout this episode here. But ultimately, you guys, we want to know if you've seen this Gremlins. That was totally. We want to know what you think. If you've seen this entire 10 movie canon of HellRaiser here. If you've made it all the way to the end, that's cool. You can fill in the blanks because we're newbies if we've missed anything. But we really enjoyed this. This is the kind of darkness that we love on Into the Portal because it's very interdimensional.
True.
Literally. So comment on our social media on what you guys think. Like hit us up on Facebook at Into the Portal Podcast. Same on Instagram at Into the Portal Podcast. Make sure to leave us that 5-star review, rating and review on iTunes or wherever you guys are listening to the show. We really, really appreciate that. Anything you have to say?
Well, shout out to our patrons over in the Patreon community. You guys got an episode coming your way real soon.
Yes.
Another, I guess just a quick thank you. We actually went ahead and bought some new equipment for our little recording studio. So we have these adorable little new stands to put our mics on, which is a lot more portable. And we actually got some new cables too.
We needed it really badly. So
thank you guys. We really, you just keep the lights on around here like we always say. So it's true. It's really true.
It really, really is.
We always appreciate it so much.
Yeah. And if you guys haven't checked us out, hit us up on Patreon. Just click the link in the show notes below and you can see us over there. And we look forward to coming back at you with another episode in a little bit here. But until next time on Into the Portal.
Your gateway to the bizarre.
This podcast is a part of Straight Up Strange Productions. Discover more shows like this one at straightupstrange.com.